SCUM here is Trump, and the only thing that has been obliterated is America's reputation. We have now descended to that level of hell in which the entire purpose of the government of the United States is to say and shout and lie so loudly and so often that the insane, deteriorating, mentally dissolving international joke that is the current president does not yell at the fools and whores who work for him and can't stand the sound of his voice another goddamned minute. He has now gotten the government of Israel to lie for him about his private war against Iran. He has now gotten his own government to issue assessments that not only completely contradict yesterday's assessments, but completely contradict his own assessments. He has now gotten his own director of national intelligence, presumably under the threat of being fired, to cherry pick somebody's intelligence, maybe ours, maybe Qatar's, maybe Joe Rogan's, who knows, and insists that this is new intelligence, and it confirms his obsession that everybody in the country, everybody in the world, everybody in the universe, everybody yet to be born must agree with him that Iran's nuclear capacity is, quote, obliterated. And for all time and forever and no arguments. And it's the greatest military success since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And don't you dare say otherwise. Don't you dare say inconclusive. Obliterated, obliterated, obliterated. Except that 24 hours ago, Trump said it was inconclusive.
Both you and Secretary Rubio and Hegseth mentioned the leak. But can you clarify, is the intelligence correct or is the intelligence wrong?
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take that we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration. And you'd think that a media outlet would say, isn't that a great thing?
Inconclusive, but also obliterated and obliterating. Because about an hour before he said that, Trump wrote this. Fake news CNN, this is all caps, by the way, so you know he really means it, together with the failing New York Times, have teamed up in an attempt to demean one of the most successful military strikes in history. The nuclear sites in Iran are completely destroyed. Both the Times and CNN are getting slammed by the public. They're not. He's holding another news conference, having Hegseth do it today to say, presumably something like, fake news CNN together with the failing New York Times have teamed up in an attempt to demean one of the most successful military strikes in history. Can I have my weekend job back at Fox and a drink, please? And by the way, Fox reported the same thing that CNN and the New York Times reported. Inconclusive. Inconclusive. And again, Trump said it was inconclusive. But don't you dare say anything about inconclusive. Don't say anything but obliteration or you will be included when America's all-time worst scumbag makes his daily proclamation of who is scum and who is not, and not just left town.
This was an unbelievable hit by genius pilots and genius people in the military, and they're not being given credit for it because we have scum that's in this group, and not all of you are. You had some great reporters, but you have scum. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick.
Good thing CNN has been sucking up to him for 3 years, or he'd be saying this 3 times a day, and not just at NATO conferences, to international reporters that have the courage, unlike our wretched leftovers, to laugh at him.
A question on Spain. Are you satisfied with today?
Oh, I think Spain's terrible what they've done. No, I do. They're the only country that won't pay the full up. They want to stay at 2%. I think it's terrible. And, they're doing very well. The economy is very well. And that economy could be blown right out of the water with something bad happening. Spain is the only country that... Are you from Spain?
Yeah.
Good, congratulations. You're the only country that is not paying. I don't know what the problem is.
Also, he wants a Nobel Peace Prize for obliteration, like Hiroshima. So to quiet dementia Trump down for a few hours, while somebody figures out a way to impeach him or 25th Amendment him or just next time leave him at The Hague, that's where the International Court of Justice is. Here is who is lying to him and to us now. Statement on behalf of the Israel Atomic Energy Commission. The devastating U.S. strike on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, combined with Israeli strikes on other elements of Iran's military nuclear program, has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons by many years. This achievement can continue indefinitely if Iran does not get access to nuclear material. This statement apparently shocked observers in Israel because it was not released by the Israeli government to anybody in that country. It was for American media only. In point of fact, it was for Trump only. You can tell that it's not largely, wholly, or perhaps at all true because Netanyahu's government, which also needs to maintain a war footing and create this sense that there is an existential threat to keep its leader out of prison for life, in this statement, Netanyahu's government credits American strikes. Now another lie, domestic. The one member of the Trump administration who seems to have gotten it right, of all people, the stopped clock herself, Tulsi Gabbard, skunkhead. Iran was not within weeks or months of a nuke. This attack would accelerate the nuclear risk, actual ascertainable fact. And then they don't even tell her in advance when they decide to bomb against her advice. She's not in the Situation Room that night, so she presumably has to issue the most ridiculous lie yet or lose her job. New intelligence confirms what POTUS has stated numerous times. Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed. What new intelligence? Whose? Did you find it on a slip of paper inside a fortune cookie, Tulsi? If the Iranians choose to rebuild, they would have to rebuild all three facilities, Natanz, Fordow, Esfahan, entirely, which would likely take years to do. Sure, because they didn't move anything out of those three facilities to allow them to put them elsewhere and build elsewhere. And they didn't learn one thing, that they better build their nukes back better and stronger than ever before this asshole bombs the empty facilities again. The propaganda media has deployed their usual tactic, selectively release portions of illegally leaked classified intelligence assessments. Tulsi, the leaker is in the house. Those were leaked by somebody with access to that information. That somebody works for Trump, you moron. Incidentally, this memo that you just issued that I'm reading here, this is you selectively releasing portions of classified intelligence assessments. I don't know, did you notice the coincidence there, Tulsi? Unless you made them up. Unless this is a lie, in which case you're in the clear. Portions intentionally leaving out the fact that the assessment was written with low confidence to try to undermine President Trump's decisive leadership and the brave servicemen and women who flawlessly executed a truly historic mission to keep the American people safe and secure. The oldest trick in the neocon book. And yes, MAGA and the neocons are now indistinguishable. Doesn't matter how differently the routes were that they took to get there. They are now the same thing. They got to the same place. Meaningless carnage in the Middle East that makes things worse and will have ramifications a quarter century from now that we can't possibly predict. But you defend that by saying that if you dare to question the outcome, the purpose, the president, the secretary of Brill Cream, if you don't say obliterated, if you don't praise dear leader, you're insulting the troops. And to try to stitch all this together, let me quote the Wall Street Journal. Iran, nuclear, obliterated. So now we have to negotiate with Iran to get them to discontinue their nuclear? Quote, Trump said he doesn't think a nuclear deal with Iran is necessary after the U.S. strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, though he added there would be talks with Tehran next week. He said the U.S. would be asking the Iranians for the same thing before Israel attacked Iran. We want no nuclear, the president said, adding, we destroyed the nuclear. Speaking from the NATO summit, Trump said he believed the ceasefire between Israel and Iran would hold. The president signaled that he wouldn't stop China from buying oil from Iran, saying Tehran needs the money to put that country back into shape. Trump also pushed back on a leaked intelligence report that said U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities only set back Tehran's nuclear ambitions by a few months. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the FBI has started a probe into how the preliminary assessment became public. Kash Patel's going to put a couple of eyes on it. As the reporter Roger Sollenberger noted about this Wall Street Journal write-up, we don't need a deal with Iran, but we're still going to ask them to give up their nuclear program, which we destroyed. And of course, it's all obliterated. And Iran is finished, and Trump posted a music video in which the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann is subhumanly repurposed as Bomb Iran. The old John McCain joke. Don't tell Trump he'll stroke out when he hears it's a John McCain joke. Good week to do it, too, when Brian Wilson has died. And remember, there's no threat. Obliterated, and you're scum if you say otherwise. So I guess that means the Trump administration is scum. Oh, and Trump, who you heard in the clip before, agreed the results are inconclusive. Trump thinks Trump is scum. And for once, he's right. There are 4 sidebars, initially anyway, to Zohran Mamdani's startling and thrilling first-round win in the Democratic primary for mayor here in Fun City. 1, the early tepidness of national Democratic support for him and for his run for mayor from Chuck Schumer, the gerontocratus in chief. He praised his campaign. Hakeem Jeffries, whose only apparent career goal is to last long enough to join that gerontocracy, did the same. Oh, he ran a wonderful campaign. What was his name again? Gentlemen, get on board. Mamdani won the middle class in New York City by doing the 2 things you idiots refused to even try to do last November. Combine concern for the financial crushing of the middle class and stand up for what's right in the country and the world, including opposing Trump and ICE and the fascists as loudly and frequently as possible, while reducing costs. It's only 2 things. I know you might have to eliminate a bunch of banquets and dinners and press conferences from your schedule to accomplish 2 things in 1 year, but this guy apparently is doing it. Also, Schumer, Jeffries, you and the other chameleons who are now trying to be centrist after everything else failed because you aren't any good at this, they are responsible for Democratic cowardice at every corner. From Politico, it is extremely alarming that the only candidates who genuinely excite our voters are the ones making absolutely insane promises on politically toxic positions. One Dem strategist tells Playbook's Adam Wren, leaving us in the spot of trying to execute on bad policy and losing terribly, or failing to keep our promises and reinforcing the idea that all politics is bullshit. Firstly, Politico, you know what bullshit is? Bullshit is granting somebody anonymity for that. You know why Kamala Harris lost last year? You know why the Senate didn't get any closer? You know why the House was lost? Because an alleged Democratic strategist who has his finger on the pulse of nothing does not have the honesty nor the confidence in his own analysis, right or wrong, to put his own goddamned worthless name on that milquetoast quote. Secondly, sir or madam, talking to Politico, how about this crazy idea? How about keeping your promises? Or, if you can't, make as much noise as possible because you have been thwarted by the armies that Maurice Maeterlinck saw. At every crossway on the road that leads to the future, each progressive spirit is opposed by 1,000 men appointed to guard the past. The second sidebar, those 1,000 men, they're all named Andrew Cuomo. The biggest threat to New York City right now, the biggest threat to the Democratic Party right now, the biggest threat to the midterms, the biggest threat in 2028 is tepid Democratic support for Mamdani for mayor. And the window that then opens for Cuomo to run as an independent, backed by another 20 million or so from Mike Bloomberg, Republican, and other rich bastard Republicans to keep the boy socialist out. Even if all that results in is spoiling it for Mamdani, and we get another term of Eric Adams. Eric Adams, who was missing yesterday in the day after the New York political earthquake because he was doing live guest hits on Newsmax from inside his car, which is where next year, in a just world, Eric Adams will be living. The third sidebar, watch now for the chance that when Trump, our minor bird president, who keeps repeating the same word, switches from to Mamdani, once they teach him how to say it, when he pivots back from persecuting Hispanics to persecuting Muslims. Under the radar, Trump has just established an America First Homeland Security Advisory Committee. On it, Mark Levin, the guy on Fox who talks like this, Corey Lewandowski. He's an advisor to Kristi Noem. You know, I've heard a lot of terms for this before. I never heard, hey, let me give you some advice, honey. And Rudy Giuliani, who apparently has escaped from his new home in the Bronx Zoo. So clearly, Levin, Lewandowski, and Giuliani are there inside Homeland Security to push back against and balance all those at Homeland Security who are in favor of protecting America. Meanwhile, after Mamdani's knockout blow, the Laura Loomer, Charlie Kirk types have already invoked 9/11. And how dare New York elect one of them? Let me tell you something. In 1910, and I have this secondhand from my late grandfathers, who were very happy about it because they were German and they had been this category of New Yorker the decade before. But in 1910, Italians not named Enrico Caruso in this city were presumed to be mafiosi. And Jews in this city were treated as third-class citizens. 23 years later, 1933, New York City elected its greatest mayor of all time, who was Italian and Jewish. LaGuardia. His mother's name was Irene Lozado Cohen. Oh, and he was a socialist. Sorry, I didn't mean to shock you. He was a Republican socialist. Our second greatest mayor, John Purroy Mitchell, was 34 when he was elected. 34? Why, that's too young. And our greatest mayor since LaGuardia, Ed Koch, to this day, we don't know his sexual orientation. And guess what? Nobody really ever bothered to ask. We don't give a crap. This is a city that looks for competence. This is a city of immigrants and assimilation, and especially the mixing of the gene pools. Often, we miss. We screw it up. I mean, we're on a hell of a mayor streak. This idiot Adams, this idiot de Blasio, this idiot Bloomberg, this idiot fascist lunatic Giuliani. But one thing we do not do, and this is the fourth takeaway after the election results in the primary, one thing we do not do is get fooled a second time. This, above all else, was lost in not just Mamdani's victory, but his victory in round 1 instead of round 7 of ranked voting. This was as much of a repudiation of Andrew Cuomo and the idea that there's no longer such a thing as bad political publicity. It's the Trump theory. It's the way we've lived for a decade now. It doesn't matter who you raped, as long as they spelled your name right. New York is trying to show America, trying to show the Democratic Party, please wake it up if you see it, that the way to beat a scumbag is to remind everybody what a scumbag he is. And while doing so, offer alternatives that can benefit them in their real lives. Trump is a scumbag. Here are free buses. I wonder if they have figured this out now. In all the places where Zamdani was attacked, and Cuomo, an unrepented sleaze. And I'll need to see a paternity test to believe he's really Mario Cuomo's son. Where Cuomo was welcomed back as if none of that had happened. Bill Clinton endorsed Cuomo. Bloomberg did. Jim Clyburn. I love Jim Clyburn. Jim Clyburn called Cuomo the future of the Democratic Party nationally. Cuomo's older than I am. Jim, your trolley has come off the track. And best of all, the New York Times editorial board, which said, whatever you do, do not put him on your ballot anywhere. Don't rank him last. There's no way he can possibly run the... F you, New York Times. And by the way, we are now officially in this period of time. The New York Times editorial board and the New York Times publisher have affirmed that the words New and York are just part of a brand name. And any actual connection between that paper and this city has long since been eliminated. I know, I called him Zamdani. It was a kind of a telescoping of his first name and his last name. Just call him Mayor. Also of interest here, anybody notice Trump went full gay bashing? I mean, I understand stuff getting buried under the avalanche of Trumpist bullshit and rage and... but full, unmistakable homophobia in writing from Trump. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this all-new edition of Countdown, since I am back in TV sports doing stuff for the baseball games, carried on the FanDuel Network sports regional outlets. Might be a good time to commemorate my departure from ESPN. The first one, this time of year, 1997. Not the second time, not the third time when I became a Disney retiree. Seriously, I'm a Disney retiree. Get me, I'm a Disney retiree. The first time I left. Boy, oh boy, was that a big story. I'll explain next in things I promised not to tell. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute the latest other worst persons in the world. The bronze David Ellison, who along with my former friend Jeff, you should have known I was lying to you, Shell, will be running CBS News once Sherry Redstone finishes pretending she's just settling a Trump lawsuit, when in fact she's taking the smell off a little payola. This is from Oliver Darcy's absolutely necessary status newsletter. Late last year, during a trip to New York City, David Ellison quietly made time for a meeting that said as much about his worldview as it did about his interest in media. According to people familiar with the matter, the Hollywood scion, I never knew how to pronounce that word, Hollywood asshole, set time aside on his busy calendar to meet with Barry Weiss, the founder of The Free Press. Ellison, like a number of C-suite executive types, parentheses, longing to turn the rest of us into robots, has long been an admirer of Weiss's style of journalism, and I have to compliment Oliver for not putting journalism in quotes here. I'm told, viewing her as one of the more compelling voices in the shifting landscape of independent journalism. Independent journalism being an ironic term for sucking Trump's ass. Ellison appeared to leave a wide range of options on the table, signaling that he sees Weiss as a valuable addition to CBS News. He wants to hire her for CBS News while he considers how to put his stamp on the news division. Trust me, you put a lunatic, loser, asshole like this woman at CBS News, you put your stamp on the news division, and then you threw the package out the window. Might as well change the name from CBS to, well, we're going to say CBS stands for completely bullshit now. While a management role is not said to be on the table, it would not be out of the range of possibilities that she could be named as an on-air contributor, or perhaps even given a coveted correspondent position on 60 Minutes. Barry Weiss is the asshole who thinks everyone and everything is woke and anti-Semitic. That criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. She wrote her way out of real journalism. She now provides a platform for people who were never good enough to be in it. If you think CBS has already hit rock bottom, no, wait. There's still the Barry Weiss basement to hit. The runner-up, Carrie Lake. You know, the fired Phoenix weathercaster who looks like the marionette from the old act, Waylon Flowers and Madam. Look it up. What, of all things, did this country actually need during Trump's private war of obliteration against Iran? The one that obliterated nothing? Propaganda or information against Iranian propaganda broadcast into Iran. What did it get? Dead air. From Axios, amid a historic flashpoint in the Middle East, the Voice of America has broadcast just 75 minutes of content targeted to its audience in Iran over the last 72 hours. This is a little old. A source familiar with the schedule said, the programming was limited to just one show for around 30 minutes Sunday morning. I believe it was Breakfast with the Beatles. And another for around 45 minutes Monday morning, the source said. Nothing against Breakfast with the Beatles. Before the Trump administration's efforts to gut funding for USAGM and its outlets, the Voice of America broadcast 24/7 for its Iranian audience. Why it matters. Duh. Driving the news, Carrie Lake, special advisor to VOA's parent agency, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, last week said termination notices were sent to 639 employees at USAGM and VOA. So the one time Carrie Lake actually does something that isn't about her and how she is the greatest martyr this side of whiny gains, the one time she does something, it actually hurt Trump's private war against Iran? I sure hope Trump doesn't hear about this. Speaking of which, our winner, Dementia Trump himself. We all know he hates black people, Jews, Hispanics, the truth, anybody who looks at him funny, Muslims, members of his own family, foreigners, sane people. And there's another 3,000 names on this list, but I'm going to skip them. But we tend to overlook his homophobia. It's transactional homophobia. Roy Cohn, who tutored Trump's psychoses and various expertises in the evil arts, he was gay. But of course, Roy Cohn hated himself for that. So this fits. This is not the first time he did this. He did this just before the election. But see if you can spot the homophobia. The sites that were hit in Iran were totally destroyed, and everyone knows it. Only the fake news would say anything different in order to try and demean as much as possible. And even they say that they were pretty well destroyed. Working especially hard on this falsehood is Allison Cooper of Fake News CNN. Allison Cooper. I have a long history with Anderson Cooper. I think he'd say hello to me if I said hello to him, and that would be the end of the conversation. It'd probably be fine. I think just too many times he missed opportunities to stand up for what was right. Other times he stood up for what was right. But that's irrelevant to this. You don't judge whether or not to say something when you read something like that based on your own personal experience with somebody. Because one of the most reliable ways of mainstreaming hatred, vile filth, prejudice, repression in government, the death of freedom of speech, one of the most reliable ways to allow eventual murderers and persecutors to begin to lay the groundwork to try to extinguish a class of people, a group of people because of who they are, is to stop calling them out every time they take a step towards that. Well, that's just Trump. Allison Coops, oh, the hell it is. In any other time, any politician who made that reference once about anybody, let alone a public figure, would be finished. Within weeks, you'd be saying, whatever happened to that Trump guy? Erased from public discourse because we stood for something, because exhausted as we might have been by war or depression or conflict or prejudice or hatred, we shamed the malefactors among us. The Cuomos of this world disappeared after what they did. Donald Trump is the worst person who has ever lived in this country. The worst. It is no longer close. The insult against Anderson Cooper, against gay men, against LGBTQ, against any minority group, against just anybody who dares to combat Trump's lies and delusions of grandeur with reality. Anybody who dares to take reality and hit Trump in the fucking face with it. That insult against those people is an insult against you and against me and against everyone in America. And when we ignore it for 1 second, it lets Trump retain strength. And draining Trump of all of his strength is our only chance of survival. Trump, homophobe. Truly, unquestionably, and permanently today's worst person in the world. There is a huge oral history of ESPN from 2011 by Jim Miller, and most of it is pretty good, but there's one line in it that triggered this recollection. The executive vice president of the company in 1997 was named Howard Katz, and in this ESPN book, he was quoted as saying, "I didn't fire Keith, I just chose not to renew his contract." And then there's a couple of quotes from guys I never heard of who said, "No, we fired him." None of it's true. Howard and I got along surprisingly well at ESPN, and even better since, so I'm just going to assume he misremembered all of this. And he's right. I mean, legally, he chose not to renew my contract early in 1997, and a couple of weeks later, instead, he offered me a new 4-year contract, which would have basically doubled my salary. And even after I had said no thanks and I signed with NBC, the then president of ABC, Bob Iger, whatever happened to him, tried to get me to back out of the NBC deal, to renege on it, and then sign a new deal at ESPN. So they offered me 2 new deals after they didn't renew my old contract. See how this works? In 96 and 97, it was no secret that my first choice was to leave ESPN. I had come within hours of asking to be let out of my deal in the summer of 1996. A radio station in Chicago, WMVP, had wanted me to go do the afternoon drive show there, a mix of news and sports, and they were offering me twice the money I was getting to host SportsCenter. And I was ready to go. Loved it, had a great week there. They wined me, they dined me, and everybody offered me a free beer. Welcome to Chicago. You're from out of town? And then ownership of the radio station simply pulled the plug on the station. It was in 31st place and said they could save a lot more money by simply rebroadcasting what was on FM radio. And eventually, and this would have been interesting had I gone to Chicago, eventually the owners sold WMVP to ESPN. Anyway, my ESPN deal was set to expire on December 31st, 1997, but they had the option to extend it for, I can't remember, either for a year after that or 2 years, but they had to notify me really early in 97. And instead, On February 18, 1997, Howard Katz proposed to my then agent that we tear up the contract and do a new 4-year deal that started at $700,000 a year and covered a radio show with Dan Patrick and the Sunday edition of SportsCenter and the ESPY Awards ceremonies and the internet and everything else. This was a lot of money for ESPN in 1997, $700,000 a year. So we played around with that for a while. But I didn't really want to go into radio full-time, not then, when I still had dark hair. So on April 4th, 1997, Howard Katz came back with another offer, 3 sports centers a week, plus some radio, starting at $550,000 a year. I noticed that this was less than the first offer. So 2 weeks later, at the first ever Jackie Robinson night at Shea Stadium in New York, Howard came up to me and asked me in front of everybody in our booth, ranging from Chris Berman to Robin Roberts to all the producers and briefly to President Bill Clinton. He asked me if we were close on this new deal that he'd offered me. I got angry at him. He got angry at me for getting angry at him. And I said, forget it. And what's more, it makes no sense for me to hang around here as a lame duck, Howard. Wait, Howard the Duck? And he calmed down. He said I could look at other jobs and we'd let things cool off and talk again about a new deal in a few weeks after I looked around to see if there was something I'd rather do than be at ESPN. And if it still wasn't going anywhere, we would agree on a date early in the summer and I could leave 6 months before the contract officially ended. And then 3 huge things happened about this that most people still don't know to this day. Even after all that, when I called Phil Mushnick of the New York Post and Richard Sandomir of the New York Times, and I told them I would be leaving ESPN, and it appeared I would be going to go to Court TV to be the host and executive producer of my own sports show 4 nights a week, I almost stayed at ESPN. Once it got out that I was leaving, I got a letter from a viewer who told me that his son, who had autism, had been at his other son's Little League game. And when his brother banged out a base hit, this kid, who had rarely ever spoken in his life, suddenly shouted out one of my catchphrases. This guy said he hit the ball real hard. Then there was a fly ball, and the boy said, it's deep and I don't think it's playable. Then they went home, and this virtually non-communicative child began to draw illustrations of my catchphrases. For whatever reason, I had triggered some kind of blossoming by this child, and his brother and his father sent me a book of the child's illustrations of my catchphrases. I am not trying to suggest I really had anything to do with this. It was good fortune and circumstance, and probably something to do with the tone of my voice, nothing more. But I was very moved by this, and I remain so. And by other things, people wrote to me or wrote in the press about how much the show Dan and I did meant to them. And I went back to Howard Katz and I said, look, I know I've been impossible. You have to understand that from my perspective, the company has also been impossible. But Dan and I created too good a show to let it die. When I go here to Court TV, I'm only going to work Monday through Thursday on this new thing. If you will send a car to take me to and from Bristol every Sunday and give me some token salary. Give me $50,000 or something. I'll just do the Sunday night show for you every week. You'll never see me. I'll never see you. It's the show that has the highest factor of management control. It's basically coloring in by numbers. And it reruns all morning on Monday, so 40% of the people who see Dan and I during the week, they see this one show. That's it. If you want some other stuff for me to do, like radio commentaries, great, we can negotiate that. But we should not let this die. At least let's have it on once a week. And Howard Katz said, okay, let me think about this. It sounds really good. And he got back to me the next day and he said it was the most difficult decision he had ever made in this business. But he just couldn't do it. It established too much of a precedent, especially the idea that somebody could work at ESPN and also at some other TV operation. He put it very bluntly. If ESPN was not the sole employer of its people, it could not control them by threatening to fire them. And he looked at me and he said, especially you. And in the same sentence, he said, look, we'd love to continue the relationship, though. We see lots of ways you could fit into ESPN Classic, like once a week or once a month or whatever, and we'd like to get in on the bidding for these radio commentaries that you're going to do on the side. Well, it all ended surprisingly amicably. I decided to go to MSNBC and NBC Sports instead of Court TV. And as I signed the contract, I called the ESPN president, Steve Bornstein, and the head of SportsCenter, John Walsh. I called them from the office of the head of NBC Sports, Dick Ebersol. And in my diary, I can't tell if that was June 19th, 1997 or June 20th, 1997, but I made the calls, and it was Ebersol's idea. Call them now. Call them right now. It'll matter later. The funniest thing was, the following Monday, June 23rd, I was packing up my stuff in my house in Connecticut. I am all set, and I am officially beginning my first week not working for ESPN and instead working for NBC, and the phone rings, and it's John Walsh in Los Angeles for something, and he has to talk to my agent immediately. Do you know where she is right now? Howard Katz and I have just spoken with Bob Iger, and he wants to present a primetime proposal to you for ABC and till you can continue at ESPN. And I laughed, and I said, John, I signed with NBC last week. The World Series and the news show and Super Bowl stuff. Remember, I called you from Dick Ebersol's office. Do you remember? It was Friday or Thursday, whatever it was. We're having the news conference today. And he is dead serious. And he says to me, oh. And there's a long pause. Well, I still need to talk to your agent. Well, I had known Bob Iger, who had apparently precipitated this phone call, since I was in college. In 1979, he had given me an hour of his time just for career advice because I had interned at the TV station for which his first wife had been a news producer, Channel 5 in New York. I told that story, I think, 2 weeks ago. And Bob was wonderful to me. So I called Bob and I explained what had happened, and he said, Steve Bornstein only told me that you were leaving this morning. I'm very, very sorry. I knew there were contentious negotiations about a new deal for you, but I had no clue it was at the point where you might actually leave. I should have known. That's my fault. That's why I told John to make the call he did. Trust me, if I'd known, it would have been totally different. I would have made it right by you. You would have wanted to stay. And if it doesn't work at NBC, you call me directly and I'll bring you back here myself. I mean, the ending was so unexpectedly and surprisingly pleasant that even when my new bosses at MSNBC suddenly announced, I think it was in Newsweek, that they were going to call my program The Big Show, which was our nickname for SportsCenter at ESPN, The Big Show, but they hadn't told anybody at ESPN that we were going to call our MSNBC show The Big Show. It was me who got on the phone with Howard Katz and a couple of other people at ESPN to apologize and to make sure they were okay with it. So even after my ESPN career was officially over and all chance of my returning was dead, we tried to revive it, both of us, Howard Katz and me, in good faith. And I don't think Bob Iger was blowing smoke at me. He had no reason to. And even after all that, the parting was non-nuclear. I think they sent me a fruit basket for my first night at MSNBC on October 1st. And then it all blew up. John Walsh called the TV sports columnist at USA Today, Rudy Martzke, and gave him my first set of ratings from MSNBC just to try to make me look like I couldn't succeed without ESPN. Martzke told me that. Direct quote, "They want to punish you publicly. Walsh has been pressuring me to run the very poor ratings, and he said, I'm going to finally do it. I just wanted to give you a little warning, and maybe you have a comment." Well, that set the tone for the next 5 years of warfare, and it was nuclear pretty quickly. But this impression that ESPN chose to dismiss me or not renew me or not bring me back, it's nonsense. Howard did not renew me. Instead, he offered to double my salary if I stayed. If I had signed with NBC, Iger was still trying to get me to back out after I had signed with NBC and stay at ESPN and ABC. The irony of this minor detail from about 1997, printed in 2011, I think, is that I had already returned to ESPN by the time it was printed. I took an hour out of my day at MSNBC to go on with Dan Patrick on his ESPN radio show from 2005 through 2007. A year after that book came out, with that quote in it, 2012, I was talking to the executives at ESPN about going back full-time. And a year later, I did, to launch a nightly show on ESPN2. And that ended when they laid off like $100 million worth of talent salaries in 2015. But then I went back again in 2018. And I did SportsCenter, and I did baseball games on radio and on TV, and I did reports, and I did commentaries. I did the not top 10 plays of the week, and on and on and on. And finally, we parted happily in the late summer of 2020 so I could return to political coverage. And I knew they wouldn't want that, and I didn't want to put it on ESPN. And the unlikely result of that, my parting happily in 2020, on the books at Disney, I am listed as a Disney and ESPN retiree. I get benefits. I retired from ESPN. I mean, they didn't give me a gold watch or anything, but I'm technically a retiree. And if you had predicted that in 1997 or 2011, well, you know the cliche. I bring all this up again because I don't know how often I have thought of that father and his two boys and the one who started speaking but only in my catchphrases. I would guess it's at least once a month. Those boys would have to be in their 30s by now, or nearly. And I wonder often of what has become of them. And I sure hope they are well. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. FanDuel Sports Network. That's the new address. 5 networks just covering baseball. 50th anniversary in the business is October. If there's still a business, if there's still a planet in October. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. That's Brian and John and me. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, appears courtesy of ESPN Inc., and it is the sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today, because we were talking about New York, was my friend Larry David, doing the impression of the old Yankees public address announcer, Bob Shepard. Everything else was, as always, my fault. Let's count down for today, day 157 of America held hostage again, and just 1,307 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck and lame-brained term, unless Putin or Musk remove him sooner, or Vance does, or the actuarial tables do, or we do. He did Iran because he thinks it will help him domestically. All that matters is that you say, the next scheduled countdown is Monday. Until that next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.
We hear it was obliteration.